So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmery on Relevant Radio.
Happy Friday. Is it a happy Friday? I don't know about you. It's a happy Friday. It's Friday night, people. Kick back. Enjoy a cup of tea, a beer, a glass of wine. I don't know. What is it for you? Sometimes we just have to acknowledge that the week is over and we are going into the weekend, and you don't have to go out and be with a bunch of people. You can do something simple to enjoy the night. I have discovered a new game. Well, my husband discovered it. It is supposedly rated one of the best 2-player games. And if you're at all a board game or game nerd at all, you have to play this game. It's called 7 Wonders Duel, and don't be intimidated by the rules if you get it. It's a blast. So if you're a fellow Duel player, let me know. We've really been enjoying it. That's what I'm doing tonight. Let me know what you're doing, besides, of course, listening to Trending. So I'm happy to be with you on your drive, wherever you may be tonight. Do you have to be willing to be martyred to be a Christian? This is the question of the night. I'll answer it in just a couple minutes, but we're going to come back to it at the end of the hour as well, because it's important to ponder in regard to some of the relics we have of Jesus Christ's life. That's right. The Catholic Church has relics of his life, one of which is pretty phenomenal when we ponder his death. So we'll touch on that and more. Joining me in just a little bit will be Dr. Susan Caldwell. And gentlemen, husbands, do you want your wives to have more energy? Listen up. Dr. Susan Caldwell will join me to discuss how we can help women in overcoming exhaustion, conceiving a baby, and postpartum recovery. So, ladies, gentlemen, this involves both of you. Don't go away. Dr. Susan Caldwell will be here shortly to discuss that. And also, growing concern regarding fertility surrounding the COVID-19 vaccine. And in the royal world, as we approach funerals and so forth with regard to Prince Philip, I want to talk a little bit about some fascinating things the now Catholic, former Anglican chaplain to Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip, some things he had to say about Prince Philip. What do you think about that whole dynamic? Who led? Prince Philip? Queen Elizabeth? I can't even imagine what challenges it must have been for those two, having she's the queen, he's kind of, the prince consort, the prince on the side. Oof, that's a tough one. Gentlemen, I'd actually like to hear your thoughts on that. Give me a call. The number's 1-888-914-9149. What do you think about Prince Philip not being king and Queen Elizabeth being the decision maker? Come on, blow it up. I'd love to hear from you. The number's 1-888-914-9149. And gentlemen, don't tell me you don't care or know nothing about the royal family, as Lucas is telling me right now. It doesn't matter. How do you feel about the queen being queen and Philip being prince? And yes, she had a husband, as one woman said. I didn't even know she had a husband. She did. Okay, so I digress. Do you think you have to be willing to be martyred to be a Christian? I put this up on social media, and between Twitter and Instagram, it's pretty much about 60% of you responded saying yes. Now, here's the deal. We're going to walk through this a little bit and see what the church has commented on and draw some conclusions. So I'll tell you the good news if you're biting your nails right now saying, wait, are you serious? I have to die in order to be a Christian? Well, yes. And no, you don't have to die a bloody martyrdom. However, we have to be willing to give up our lives. This is what it means to be baptized in a certain respect. But let's talk about this first. The Catechism of the Catholic Church discusses how martyrdom is actually the supreme witness of the truth of the faith. It means being witnesses even unto death. So martyrdom is a supreme witness that any Christian could give to the truth of our faith. Now, for some people, even in the world today, the only way you can be a Christian is to be martyred, essentially. You can either apostatize, give up your faith, say you no longer believe, and cave, or be willing to die for it. Now, in the Gospel according to John, chapter 15, we know that line that we ponder and we love, and it sounds really nice, but it's actually really morbid. A man has no greater love than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. Very sweet and cute, and I see people post it on, their fridge and on a notebook. But you guys, do you know what this means? Death. It means you have to die. A man has no greater love than this, than that he lay down his life for his friends. Okay, gentlemen, are you listening? Ephesians chapter 5, St. Paul, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. Well, what did Jesus do? He died for his church, his bride. We see countless examples of this throughout the Old Testament. Just one, we'll pick Susanna, for example, in Daniel 13. Rather than dying, she'd rather die, essentially, than yield to the desires of the two men that had desires for her. She'd rather die to uphold her faith in the principles that stood true of what it meant to be a person of faith, what it meant to honor your body. Even John the Baptist, the last of the Old Testament prophets, you could even say the last of the Old Testament saints, was beheaded. Why? Because he stood firm in his faith, and by the way, he stood firm on the topic of marriage. A great saint to turn to in a culture that's very confused about marriage. Another great example is Revelation chapter 7, where we read St. John, the book of Revelation, the last book of the Bible. You should know this, right? Come on, Catholics. B-Y-O-B, not your beer, your Bible, okay? So Revelation chapter 7, we read here that all the saints are standing before the throne, and they're saying salvation is from God. And then it's read that these are the ones who have survived the great period of trial. They have washed their robes and have made them white in the blood of the Lamb. So what do we learn here? The people who are in heaven before God's throne, praising him, saying salvation is from God, are the same people who were martyred. Ooh. So far, what are you thinking? Do you think you have to be willing to be martyred to be a Christian? Well, let's think about it in relation to our baptism. Through baptism, we are becoming little Christs. We become members of Christ, as the Catechism says. You see, you no longer belong to yourself, but to Christ who died and rose. So if you belong to Christ and you're supposed to become a little Christ, and we're supposed to pick up our cross and follow him, well, that means that you and I have to follow whatever he has in store for each of our individual vocations. We have to follow him without wavering to the point of death. This is what Christian witness is. That we stand true to our convictions and we live them out. And so we have to ponder and ask ourselves when we do that daily, nightly examination of conscience with it, which if you're not doing yet, it's time to start doing it. How have I done well today? How have I been overcoming some of those bad habits and sins I'm struggling with, especially those that harm my relationships with the people I interact with day to day? But also, how have I denied Christ? How have I denied my faith? What can I do better? Now, here's the deal. I think ultimately, each and every single one of us have written on our heart naturally a desire to live and die for something. I think that we see this in the epidemics worldwide, especially here in the United States, over drug overdoses, increase in suicide, depression, anxiety. People are looking for something to live for. Better yet, someone to live for. I was even thinking of this as we heard about the rapper DMX who overdosed last week, had a heart attack, and ultimately ended up dying. And I think of this as I've seen drug addiction in my own extended family, and we've had tragic deaths in the family. People are looking for something to live for or to die for. They want both. And some people are choosing an easy way out of life because they don't think they have anything to live for. But let's show that there is something worth dying for and dying for within the right context. And remember, dying for something, you and I may not be called to a bloody martyrdom, but all of us, and St. Mother Teresa of Calcutta talked about this, white martyrdom. All of us are called to martyrdom. It's this simple, and sometimes in the United States today, this simple suffering and death to self, where we witness to God even when it's uncomfortable, when we are being suppressed as people of faith, when we're being forced to try and participate in things we don't believe in, such as abortion, and we have to fight against the culture we live in. Why? All for the glory of God. And so I'd like to hear, are we called? Do we think we have to be willing to be martyred to be Christians? Well, yes. Because we're always called to a death of self so that we can be united with Christ and the cross he has. Does that mean we'll experience a bloody martyrdom? Perhaps not. But I think we need to be ready more than we are in the days that are to come for what we'll experience in this life. I don't know what will happen. You don't know. There are people in the Middle East being beheaded for their faith. What will happen to you and I? You're listening to Trending with Timmerie here on Relevant Radio. Joining me will be Dr. Susan Caldwell here on Trending. Dr. Susan Caldwell is a NAPRO doctor, and she joins us regularly to address issues of fertility. Dr. Caldwell practices in New Orleans, and we're going to dive in today to the topic of nutrition for postpartum and for conceiving a baby. And husbands, gentlemen, don't go away. This is important. Do you want your wives to have more energy? Listen up. I think this is one of the key things that is often missing in the care of women as they're trying to conceive or right after having a baby. Dr. Caldwell, welcome to Trending.
Hi, Timmerie. It's so great to be back.
Thanks for having you be here with us. We're so excited. Let's talk a little bit about nutrition. I was asking what you wanted to talk about today, and you said this has been something on your mind a lot. You work with people who are struggling to conceive, struggling with various health issues surrounding their cycle. What's going on right now that you're seeing in the culture is very common impacting this issue?
Yeah, I've been seeing so many women recently that are just depleted. They just come in and they feel terrible. And many times these same women are trying to get pregnant and they don't understand why they're feeling this way. And I've just been doing a lot of thinking about it as I'm seeing these women. And I really think that it's the culmination of just how women's health is done in our culture today. You know, it's very much from the beginning of when women start having periods. We just we put people on the pill so easily because of little problems with their cycle or acne or so forth. And like, let me give you an example. I saw a patient a couple of months ago, and she had 2 children in her 20s after being on the pill for 10 years because of some irregularities in her cycle and acne. And she had 2 children, and she did pretty well with them. But then after she had her second child, now here she is in her early 30s, she's having terrible premenstrual syndrome, fatigue, headaches. She's having a little bit of an unusual bleeding pattern that she wasn't able to pick up on until she started charting. But just right away, after being on the pill for 10 years, the pill depletes women of many of the vitamins and, of course, the progesterone that she would have been making having regular cycles. So her lining of her uterus is completely thin and depleted and not going through those cycles of growth and then shedding, right? So the lining is stagnant. She's been losing all of this nutrition, all of her vitamins, so many vitamins. Anybody can Google, what does the pill what vitamins does the pill cause a woman to lose? It causes a type of leaky gut. So she's already set up, nutritionally depleted, and then without her real cycle to tell her to be a dashboard of her health, which our cycle is supposed to be. She wasn't able to see. Everything looked perfect, right, on her pill. So she didn't think anything was wrong. And then she had 2 children back to back, which probably, maybe her levels of nothing was probably being checked. No vitamins. Maybe she was getting prenatals during this time, but that's it. And she had 2 miscarriages back to back. During this time, she got diagnosed with Hashimoto's, which is an autoimmune disorder of the thyroid. I found her to be extremely low in vitamin D. She had almost like no iron. Her iron was so low. She started charting. Her charting showed some irregularities, like she had a very short luteal phase. She wasn't making enough progesterone. Her estrogen was very, very low. She was found to have something called MTHFR, which is a genetic mutation that it gives you trouble processing folic acid. Anyway, so we found all of these things. She was totally depleted. She was exhausted. Her husband was frustrated. They thought they would never be able to conceive again. And now her levels, so her levels are great. She's on medicine. She's on great vitamins. And I'm waiting to hear of a positive pregnancy test. I'm so excited because, of course we're still in the process, but this is a common story that I see day in and day out.
Yeah. And it's so fascinating because I remember, my husband and I were trying to conceive a baby, and some of the first things they do is they're testing, trying to figure out what was wrong. I ended up having PCOS and Hashimoto's disease, and, they sent us home with a handout as well saying, make sure that you're taking, your iron, make sure you're taking your vitamin D, you're on a good prenatal, and a number of other things, trying to make sure that your body's working at full capacity to make and create a human. And it's so important. And so this is such I think, incredible testimony for many people, because I know, especially being in the postpartum phase now as well, and autoimmune diseases are so common, many undiagnosed, many women have no idea what's going on. And so they're suffering even from severe postpartum disorders after, and they don't know it's caused by either deficiency or even a possible autoimmune issue. And so how can we help? Like, what are the number 1 or number 2 things that can help with exhaustion, especially for people going through postpartum?
I think there's so many. So there's I'll just name some things that are very important in the foundation. So number 1 would be water. I think that's the number 1. Maybe not number 1, but it's huge. When somebody tells me they're tired, many times they are not drinking water. They're drinking sugary drinks or
yes, ma'am, I'll
coffee.
drink right now.
Yep. And they need, a woman who's not breastfeeding needs about 2 liters a day. And a woman who is breastfeeding, more than that, for sure. And then sleep. I know sleep is hard, certainly in the postpartum state, but it's about quality and it's about asking for help, right? I know it's hard sometimes because we want to be able to do it all. And then nutrition, the quality of the food, the good fats, making sure you're getting healthy fats, because that's how our reproductive hormones, testosterone, estrogen and progesterone, even cortisol, the precursor is cholesterol. So we really don't need to be on low fat diets and low carb usually is a good idea, but not low fat. It should be lots of olive oil and avocados and nuts and seeds, and our vitamins, especially vitamin D and iron, getting healthy exercise and movement that helps us get rid of our stress and helps our body recover. And then healthy relationships, like having people in your community, of course, your husband, but people that you really can lean on and share your heart with, and that will help you. Yeah, those are, I think, the foundations.
If you're struggling to conceive a baby, have questions about postpartum and fertility overall, or underlying health concerns impacting women's fertility, give us a call. The number's 1-888-914-9149. Dr. Susan Caldwell is here with me. A question for you. How often should women check up on their blood work to see what sort of deficiencies they have, whether preconception or postpartum?
That's a great question. Number 1, a woman should just be able to check in with herself to say, hey, how am I doing on those things that I just mentioned? Just the sleep and the water. And if she's doing all of that and feeling a lot of energy, feeling great, then, she might not need anything more than just a regular panel, just a regular TSH maybe. If she feels good, her cycles are good, and ideally should be charting, to make sure that that there's no strange bleeding patterns or lack of mucus or hormonal regularity seen on the chart. So maybe yearly. And it's very hit or miss what doctors are willing to order what labs. So it'd be great to be able to find a doctor who's willing to do more than just the very basic blood work.
Yes. I know this has been extremely helpful for me, being able, especially with my autoimmune issues and trying to conceive, checking regularly. How's the iron? How's the vitamin D? How's the progesterone level? For me, I've been low on progesterone. Pre-conception, also while pregnant. And so I think that these are all really great examples. We'll come back and we'll briefly explain what charting is, how being aware of what's happening day to day in your body can really help you to indicate stress or even be warning signs for a lack of proper nutrition. We'll also come back. There have been some questions surrounding the vaccine's impact on having children. So we're here with Dr. Susan Caldwell, an expert in fertility, NAPRO doctor. Don't turn that dial. You can find us at relevantradio.com/trending.
Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmery on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
I have a question for Dr. Susan Caldwell. She's a NAPRO doctor specializing in fertility, infertility, and underlying health issues impacting women. Give us a call. The number's 1-888-914-9149. Coming up, we're going to be talking about some of the incredible relics we have of Jesus' life. The church has from all those years ago, and I love to ponder this during Easter. We'll also talk about some fascinating tell-alls that a former chaplain to Prince Philip and Queen Elizabeth ended up sharing. And by the way, this former Anglican bishop, he's Catholic now. It's phenomenal. We'll be back on that in just a minute. Here's the deal, Dr. Caldwell, I want to touch briefly for those who are not familiar at all with NAPRO technology. Can you give a brief kind of breakdown of what NAPRO technology is and how it's complemented and how the science is there with doing NAPRO tracking as well with a fertility care practitioner?
Yes, so NAPRO technology is short for natural procreative technology. It is the medical intervention, the evaluation and treatment that a doctor or a advanced care practitioner uses to evaluate the problems that a woman is having in her cycle. But first, before the doctor can evaluate what's going on, the woman needs to be taught about her body. She needs to become an expert in identifying anything that is wrong with her chart, with her cycle, and she does that by charting her cycle using the Creighton model fertility care system. So she is taught over, usually it takes about 2 months for a woman to really kind of identify the key biomarkers in her cycle that will be relevant, the data that she collects, all using vaginal mucus or vaginal discharge system. So it's simple. A woman goes to the bathroom, pays attention to what's there, blood, mucus, dryness, and she learns how to mark it all down because there's a shorthand system that makes it very objective and standardized. And she becomes an expert, like I said. And then her charting teacher helps her to identify things that may indicate a problem. So then she comes into a NAPRO doctor like me, and I am able to take one look at the chart and talk to her and kind of hear her story. And we're able to kind of find a problem list there and be able to start to figure out what's causing those problems and therefore give her some relief.
Fabulous. That's so helpful, I think, for people to know it. I mean, this is a new territory, and some people will say, why can't I just, use some of the simple apps? You have Kandara and some of the others that are out there that are great, but they don't match the NAPRO science that is a tested medical philosophy for where you can provide information to a specialist, a NAPRO doctor, who can, I'm amazed by it, between the fertility care practitioners and then doctors like yourself who practice NAPRO technology. You can look and say, okay, what happened during these few days? Were you stressed? What was going on? Or even looking, okay, I'm seeing a pattern here of possible PCOS or various things. It's phenomenal how the woman's body works. And it provides so much information about how we can better care for ourselves as well.
Yes, it's really beautiful, and the way it's integrated, and every single patient, I mean, maybe not, but almost all, they come back and they say, I had no idea that my body worked this way. I'm so grateful to know this information. And then she's set up for whatever her goals might be, to have children, to avoid pregnancy, or just to know what her health is going to be like. Even, now I'm, perimenopausal, almost right there at menopause. And I've been watching my chart over the last 10 years, amazed at how my body is changing. And if I hadn't had a chart, I would think something was terribly wrong. If I didn't know this information, I wouldn't know, I wouldn't understand what's going on. But, I'm able to help women who are in similar situations navigate that and say, no, this is okay. This is what your body's, doing. It's okay.
We're going to have you back on soon to talk about menopause. Sorry, gentlemen. It's important. Y'all have to deal with women in your lives. This is important for you to know and understand. But quick couple tips in terms of the menopausal phase. What can women do by going to a NAPRO doctor? Because I think a lot of people believe that NAPRO doctors are just for people who are having a hard time conceiving, but they don't think about it for later on in their lives.
Right. Well, really, it's for anyone. NAPRO is for anyone in cycles, having periods. So, menopause is technically defined as a year after a woman's last period. She enters the phase known as menopause. So after she's a year past her last period, NAPRO is not going to be helpful, nor is NAPRO helpful for a woman who has had a hysterectomy, because she no longer has the charting, the biomarkers there. The vaginal discharge is no longer relevant at that point. So it's not helpful. Not to say that those women can't be helped in other ways, looking at other hormones and making sure she's healthy in general. But NAPRO is really geared toward women who are still cycling. And then women, again, who are in their 40s typically are having really funny cycles, and they need help because they need to know if this is abnormally abnormal, just due to the decline in their fertility, or is this something that can be prevented or it needs help to be restored?
Excellent. Great. So again, recommending NAPRO doctors. We'll post a link on social media to NAPRO doctors that you can find here in just a minute. And it's actually in my link tree on Instagram. So if you head over to relevantradio.com/trending, we have some great resources there for you to find a NAPRO doctor, such as Dr. Susan Caldwell and or a fertility care practitioner to start charting. We have a call. We have Dalia from Austin on the line. Has a question about her niece for Dr. Caldwell. Welcome to Trending.
Hi, thank you. Dr. Caldwell, love the topic. I remember when I first learned about charting, it was just like phenomenal. It's like, why do we not teach all women this? So my niece, she had anemia, and they gave her a transfusion, and then they put her on birth control because try and get her to start having a normal cycle again. And I'm trying to encourage my sister to, seek out a NAPRO technologist because they're seeing her pediatrician.
Yeah. Super important to head this off at the pass. Okay. I have a blog, drsusancaldwell.com, and I have a post about how important it is for adolescents to not be on birth control, because birth control shuts down the ovaries. And at the very time when these girls' ovaries are trying to mature and to function. And so it's almost like if someone was in physical therapy and was was learning how to walk again, and you just said, oh, don't do that. Let's just put you in a wheelchair, which then all the muscles would atrophy. The person would have a very hard time ever walking if you didn't allow them to kind of walk. So it's important for your niece to get into see an neurotechnology doctor, because what we can do in those cases, well, first of all, generally when patients of that age are having heavy periods, it's simply due to the immaturity of the communication between the brain and ovaries. The ovaries aren't making progesterone like they should, and the estrogen levels are too high, which causes the thick lining and heavy periods. So what your niece needs is some progesterone, which is natural and very healthy to her growing reproductive system. And that progesterone is going to help. It may be even temporary. It may be 6 months or so to get her over that, so that her brain and ovaries can better communicate, and the lining of the uterus won't get so heavy, the periods won't be so heavy, and she can get into regular cycles. And then eventually she won't need to maybe see an infertility doctor, right, in 10 years after being on the pill for 10 years when her reproductive system doesn't work. We can address the problem now and get her cycles going in the right direction, instead of paralyzing her reproductive system with the pill.
Fantastic, Dr. Caldwell. That is, so phenomenal for people to understand what birth control does to shut down the ovaries.
Right.
No one's putting it as simple as you just did to understand what's happening. And when you shut down a certain function in the body for a certain period of time, it doesn't necessarily start working or working correctly.
Right.
And I'm we're posting a link now to Dr. Susan Caldwell's website and her blog with incredible resources surrounding everything from stress, infertility, miscarriage, low progesterone, you name it. This was an excellent question. What are some of the most common questions you received, Dr. Caldwell? And actually, before I come there, a question came in, and I wanted to touch on this. There have been reports of women having heavier, painful, longer, very abnormal cycles after having had the COVID-19 vaccine. Lots of people, we've seen trends, for example, Dr. Kate on Twitter, went viral over the last couple of months. What should women know with regard to fertility, infertility, and the COVID-19 vaccine, and even the lack of information?
Yeah, I went to that website and checked that out. And I just want to, we got to pause, because, our period is the result of ovulation or not ovulating well or not ovulating well. But it takes about 100 days for an egg to be released from the follicle. So this follicle on the ovary has to grow over about 3 months until it's finally released. And then about 2 weeks after that is a period. So I don't want to jump to conclusions here, because, we like to think that whatever happened right before a period was bad was the problem.
Immediate cause and effect.
But it's not. So I just, as much as, I like to always think, oh yeah, what happened? And, we always should be detectives. We always should be listening and looking and questioning what's happening with our bodies. But I hesitate to blame the vaccine if a period is abnormal. And I think this is something we really we don't have a good grasp of, anything that's happening with women's bodies, because so many people are on the pill, and not enough doctors are asking these questions of why are people's periods abnormal? Why are they heavy or what have you? And we just don't have the science. So this is why each woman has to be her own expert. She has to get educated. She needs to learn how to chart and be able to look and figure that out herself. And when she sees patterns, we need to then start investigating to know what's wrong with her hormones.
So here are a couple questions I'm going to throw out there. There's information that's circulated that Pfizer released a 10-page guide for healthcare workers. And in that, they had a section titled Fertility, Pregnancy, and Lactation. And in that, they made very clear there's no or limited data with regard to the impact that the vaccine can have on fertility. So I know a lot of women are very concerned because there have been some comments, even from former people who have worked for some of these vaccination companies that are producing the COVID-19 vaccine, where they're saying, don't get it, it's harmful for fertility and so on. But then what's happening is we actually see Pfizer in that 10-page guide and among other areas has actually advised that if someone's trying to get pregnant, to not try to get pregnant for 2 months and even to go on the pill after receiving the vaccine. So what are women supposed to do here?
We just don't know. These vaccines got emergency use authorization because this virus was killing people. So just like everything in the realm of fertility and pregnancy, that's not studied. Women are not studied. Most of these studies that are done, even in the vaccine populations, were not women who were fertile, who were pregnant. Or even just trying to get pregnant specifically. So there's just a huge question mark. We don't know. So even more, this is more important that women who are in this age of COVID, who are trying or considering getting pregnant in the next 6 months to a year, chart your cycles, know your body. And, I don't want to tell people because it's such an individual decision. I don't want to say a blanket statement or do or don't get the vaccine. But you have to know your risks, for example, or just the benefits for you. So, for example, if a woman is a nurse and she's on the front line, she and her doctor may decide that for her, the risk of the vaccine is less than the benefit to her and her patients because she's so exposed to the virus and so many of her patients are exposed to the virus. So for her, she may be in a different category, but somebody who has little or no exposure to COVID and might be on the unhealthy side already in terms of, I don't mean, great, very, very sick, but someone who has a lot of issues might not want to get the vaccine. Maybe her risk of getting COVID is very, very low, but her fertility is a little bit suboptimal maybe. And there are other things that might be compromising her fertility. Maybe she might want to hold off on getting a vaccine until she really sees if she is indeed able to get pregnant.
Great information. And I think a lot to ponder for people who aren't sure what to do. It's a challenging place with the lack of information. Like you said, the speed with which this vaccine was brought forward. We have a question. Michelle calling from Chino, California, my home diocese, San Bernardino Diocese in California. She's calling because she has a question about trying to have another baby. What's your question for Dr. Caldwell?
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm turning 34 Monday. I had a miscarriage in 2018. Oh, thank you. Miscarriage in 2018, but right after we got pregnant again, March. So miscarriage in January, March we ended up having our rainbow baby, but I had subchorionic hemorrhaging, and then now my baby's turning 3 in November, and we're trying to conceive again, and then I found out I have a fibroid. So I'm just wondering what I can do, and my cycle is pretty much normal. It lasts 28 to 32 days, and then, we do it during what I think is ovulation time, and the next thing you know, my period comes. And I don't know if there's NAPRO in California, or where do I go, because I am, in Chino and San Bernardino County. Can you help me find out resources?
Yes, and as Timmery said, she posted the list of NAPRO doctors, and I'm absolutely sure that they have a NAPRO doctor in your area. Maybe Timmery could speak to that.
There are quite a few in the Southern California area. There are a number of, a couple in San Diego, one that's a little closer to you as well in Fallbrook, and although she's having a baby right now, so she's out for a little bit, but there are a few in Orange County as well, so check out that list. I posted it on social media for fertility care provider NAPRO Technology, but any feedback that you would have immediately for first steps, Dr. Caldwell, would be great for Michelle.
Yeah. And maybe even get a charting teacher, the fertility care practitioner first, even before you see the doctor. That would even be great. And then again, the things I said earlier, make sure you're really taking care of yourself, getting your sleep, quality sleep, a lot of, good amounts of water. You're getting good nutrition. Your vitamins, a great prenatal vitamin, and you're, getting exercise. And really, you said something about your ovulation, track anything you can track now when you think you're ovulating, pay attention if you think that you see that fertile mucus. And then if you could even start using, ovulation prediction kits, anything you can do to have more of data about what's happening during your cycle. All of that would be great. And just, it helps you to tune in more to your body and listen to what your body's trying to tell you. And by the time you get to see these professionals, you're going to be, it's going to be a lot easier and quicker for you to find out if there's anything, any roadblocks to another pregnancy.
Michelle, you will be in our prayers as you work to conceive, along with anyone else who is trying to conceive a baby. I can't recommend highly enough, find a NAPRO doctor near you. We're posting it in the podcast notes and on social media. Head over to relevantradio.com/trending. You will not regret finding more information out about your body, what's going on, and possible help for conceiving a baby. And I'll just share this briefly. Dr. Susan Caldwell has shared her story. She used IVF and would never recommend it for everyone. She practices NAPRO technology for a reason. And so don't fall prey to what the culture says of just use in vitro fertilization. It has such a negative impact on women's bodies, and we deserve more. We deserve to know the underlying health causes. We want to work toward wholeness in our body. So that's Dr. Susan Caldwell here on Trending. We're posting links to her website. You can find them at relevantradio.com/trending. I'll be right back to talk about Prince Philip. What do you do when your wife's the one leaving the country? We'll also talk about some incredible relics brought from the Holy Land that we have in the Catholic Church today. Catholic Order of Foresters is proud to sponsor the Relevant Radio studio line. For information about employment opportunities and flexible premium life insurance plans, visit relevantradio.com/forester.
So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmery on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
Welcome back to Trending, and I haven't gotten to talk about it. Surprise, surprise, something happens in the royal world, and it took me this long to discuss. And yes, Queen Elizabeth had a husband, and he was not king. It's just the way the line of succession goes. She was the eldest child, only girl. She ends up becoming queen, and the man she marries, a prince, ends up not being the king. And I can't imagine what that would have been like for their marriage. In fact, we get a glimpse of it in The Crown if you believe everything The Crown has to tell you about what that marriage looked like. But here's the deal. I find this fascinating. So there was actually an Anglican bishop who served the crown, was the private chaplain to Queen Elizabeth and her husband for about 9 years, just up until about 2017. And he converted to Catholicism 2 years ago. Incredible story. Now, just a side note here, this Anglican bishop converted to Catholicism. Well, his wife did it first. She converted, became Catholic, and 2 years later, that bishop is now a Catholic. And not a Catholic bishop, though. That Anglican bishop became Catholic. So Gavin Ashenden, he shares a story and some information about how when he was working with the Crown, he was a private chaplain, how actually he said that specifically Philip, he said, exemplified the kind of humility and self-giving that Christianity has at its heart. Now, I found this fascinating because this had to have been, I think a lot of people hear some of the stories about how, he struggled in their marriage, he struggled to stick around. People just assume what they see at the Crown, in the Crown, is what he was. And I haven't continued to watch the show past that first season or so. It had rather intense scenes there that were way too much. But I am really interested to hear this. Sometimes we don't hear a lot about the personal lives of the British aristocracy, or even about Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip. And so to here is a man who was kind of told he had to take a back seat. You know, there's debate over what sort of title he would have. Some say, well, he really wasn't comfortable with being the backseat driver for Queen Elizabeth. And yet here's a man who had an incredible military career that actually had to give up his military career, if you didn't know this, to really be at the Queen's side to support her as she carried this huge responsibility of being the Queen. And he remained there. And so many people have commented on how profound his loyalty and how profound his presence has been. And I always think it's fascinating because this is a guy who is known as a man's man. He gave up the military career, as I mentioned, and he stood there. He stood strong, and he saw where his vocation responsibility was in a really unique situation that you and I have never had to be in. But in a respect, I think that what we see in this challenge of, say, a norm in marriage of the husband and father being the predominant leader, which is, by the way, fundamental to Christian Catholic worldview of marriage, they made it work. They had a marriage that lasted a very, very long time. I mean, he dies like 2 months before his 100th birthday. It's pretty incredible. And here, a chaplain who, toward the end of Prince Philip's life, ends up saying that he had more books than anything else having to do with God, faith, and theology, unless you want to count bird watching, of course. He must have been quite the bird watcher. But I found it fascinating that these words were said about him. He exemplified the kind of humility and self-giving that Christianity has at its heart. And then this former Anglican bishop, who was a chaplain, said he had patience, long-suffering, humility, and kindness. Those are 4 pretty incredible virtues. For a man who was expected to be there and stand at his wife's side, but not to lead the country. Now, we could get into the weeds about whether or not Queen Elizabeth actually leads the country. We had callers calling in about that and venting about the way they run their monarchy over there. But these 4 things, patience, long-suffering, humility, and kindness. Those are 4 things that I think every man, every husband can have, no matter what the situation is in their life. Patience, being patient with the situation, being patient with the people around you. Long-suffering, enduring. This is fundamental to masculine spirituality and virtue, to have this ability to endure and long-suffering, to be humble and to be kind. I hope that when we die, people will be able to say such things about us. Exemplify the kind of humility and self-giving that Christianity has at its heart. Those are pretty profound words from someone who served the royal family, who's converted to Catholicism, and I imagine he himself has been pondering his own vocation as a husband, man, and so forth. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie here on Relevant Radio. Let's talk about some of the relics of Christ's life. I've been sharing about them all week long here on Trending. If you haven't been listening, we did an Easter series last week about some of the saints who witnessed the resurrection. Now we've been talking about the relics and what happened to the apostles after Jesus Christ resurrected. And here's a really cool relic that if you've never been to it before, you have to go the next time you have the opportunity to go to Rome. It's the Holy Stairs, the Scala Sancta, as it's known there. Did you know that St. Helena in 362 actually had 28 steps transported to Rome? And guess what? These steps were the exact steps that tradition holds Jesus walked up to Pontius Pilate on. Now, in 1589, Pope Pius V actually used these steps along with various frescoes of Old Testament and New Testament depictions to educate people on their faith who were illiterate. Now, these stairs are incredible. I had the opportunity. I didn't even know the Catholic Church had these. When I was in Rome about 10 years ago, I had the opportunity to not just see them, but to travel up them. And I say travel up them because there's something special about these steps. The Scala Sancta, the only way you're allowed to go up the steps is on your knees. Those 28 long steps. And you're meant to pray and ponder the passion of Christ, one step at a time. My knees were bruised. The steps are uneven. They're old. It was uncomfortable. But it was one of the most incredible experiences to ponder that as your knees are hurting, you're on the steps that Christ walked up to receive his sentencing from Pontius Pilate. And here I am uncomfortable and frustrated because my knees are hurting. And yet I'm supposed to be pondering the mysteries of Christ. And people will even go so far as to pray 1 decade of the rosary at a time and then go up to the next step. And then up to the next step. Or maybe it's a Hail Mary. And I found it fascinating is that as I went up one after another, you actually wanted to stay longer. You wanted to be more present in the fact that Christ suffered for us in that long suffering that we're just talking about. That long suffering that Jesus Christ endured. What a phenomena that we have the steps that Christ walked up to truly see that our faith is so tangible, so real, and Jesus Christ is a real person in history who resurrected and who changed the world and has changed your life and mine.